Bulgaria's new president was elected on a wave of discontent. After 10 years in the EU, his country is still the poorest in the bloc and considered the most corrupt. Some in the international community are concerned that President Rumen Radev's mandate could mark a step towards Russia. But the president contends this doesn't entail a step away from Europe. Well, to discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by the president at the Presidential Palace in Sofia. Many thanks for being with us on the Global Conversation. Why can't Bulgaria get its act together after so many years?
I think we need to take an objective look at the problems in Bulgaria as part and parcel of the problems of the EU. Of course, a number of problems remain, namely poverty, the feeling of an absence of justice. The democratic crisis is a huge problem for Bulgaria. Resolving these problems require decisive measures from those who are at the helm.
Bulgaria has got a corruption issue. You've just been issued a warning by the European Union. The latest Transparency International Index marked Bulgaria as the worst performer in the European Union. What makes you think that you will be able to succeed where your predecessors have failed?
Yes, there is corruption in Bulgaria, but I could not say that Bulgaria is the most corrupt country in the EU. Bulgaria is making efforts to fight corruption, but I'm sure we need to make much bigger efforts. We need to bring together the efforts of institutions, political parties, civil society organizations, and the entire country in order to fight corruption and crime.
One problem in tackling this is the political instability in your country. You're now going to have the third government in 4 years. There's elections in late March. How can you grapple with these very fundamental issues when you are rocked by this instability?
You are right in that. Political instability gives birth to a number of other problems, to the economy, to justice. I do hope that the next elections will give us a parliament which will be able to think more about the interests of the people, that would adopt legislation in the interests of the people, and that the government, with swift and decisive measures, would reinstate trust to the state institutions.
When you were elected, some people said you were Moscow's candidate and your election was a loss for Europe. You say that you will try and have a balanced approach with your presidency, but is it possible to serve two masters, Moscow and Europe?
Frankly speaking, I do not understand this question. I graduated from 2 US military academies and organized and conducted many NATO exercises here in Bulgaria, bilateral and multinational ones.
You have advocated easing of sanctions on Russia and have also advocated a détente with Russia.
Yes, I definitely think sanctions do not bring about definite benefits. They rather hurt the economies of Russia and the European Union.
There is obviously the issue of Crimea. That's why the sanctions were imposed in part. If one lifts the sanctions, does that then mean that one ignores international law?
Of course, the Crimea annexation was a violation of international law, and Bulgaria firmly supports all principles of international law. The big question is how long Europe will remain divided by sanctions which undermine trust. 5 years? 10 years? 50 years?
When it comes to those sanctions, there will be a vote in July on whether to uphold them and continue them in the European Union. Will you push, therefore, for Bulgaria to vote against the continuation of sanctions?
There is a lot of time until July. The situation is literally changing by the day. Let's imagine an interesting situation when the administration of President Trump and President Putin come to an agreement on improving dialogue and growing trust, decreasing confrontation through the prism of sanctions. How would Europe react?
Okay, well, you've mentioned Donald Trump. Donald Trump has made a link between refugees and migration and terrorism. Do you concur with him on that?
As we have already witnessed, there have been cases of terrorist attacks, and these attacks were quite serious. If they become more frequent, what would that mean to Europe?
But some would argue that this is a misinterpretation of the facts. Many of the terrorist attacks have actually been carried out by nationals of those countries.
Some of these terrorist attacks have been conducted by second and third generation migrants. This is a very serious issue. On the other hand, there have been terrorist attacks carried out by people who came within the flow of migrants, and this is taking place right now. So this is a substantial mix of threats. So when talking about terrorism, we should not overlook any one threat if we indeed consider the security of European citizens substantially.
On the issue of immigration and European Union refugee policy, you have said that you are not for the relocation of refugees and the quota system that was proposed by the European Union. At the same time, you say Bulgaria is a compassionate country. How can you combine those two?
Very easily. It goes without saying, in Bulgaria, we do everything we can to help people fleeing the horrors of war, but we have to see the difference between refugees and illegal immigrants. What are the criteria of a successful integration? And I think Europe has a problem with that. It's unclear how much financial resources it would take and what the impact on the social system would be, how many people Europe can provide shelter for, and at what price?
Finally, President, you are in many respects inexperienced when it comes to politics. You're a former leader of the Air Force in Bulgaria. Do you see that as a hindrance or a help when you're faced with these many challenges?
There are both pros and cons. The absence of experience in politics is a problem, but it could also be a huge advantage, because in present-day politics, what is needed is impartiality and objective views, and people who don't think of politics as such, not of their political party's interests, but of the nation, and here I have an advantage.
President, many thanks for having joined us on the program.
Благодаря.
Thank you.